Hi there, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Adam, and I am the program manager at Latitude 53. Right now, I'm at home, but in our gallery, we have work by Walter Scott. If you visit our website, latitude53.org, you can take a peek at what that looks like, including a live stream of Walter's video work, The Pathos of Mandy, inside the gallery, which I believe, I'm told, is still working, even though we're live streaming through multiple channels right now. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by Walter and by Brenda Draney to talk about Walter's work. First, I want to say that Latitude 53 and my home are located in Treaty 6 territory, and Latitude 53 can only exist here in the footsteps of people who have lived here forever, especially the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis people for whom this is their traditional homelands. Treaty 6 and the city of Edmonton are home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and we can only exist in gratitude to the people who have been here always. With that said, I would love to introduce you all to Walter and Brenda, and here they are. Brenda's having a little laugh already. Good. Hi, folks.
Hello.
Do you two want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
I should go first because then you're like the grand finale.
Well,
that sounds great.
I was going to say, Brenda, why don't you go ahead?
Ladies
but
first.
Like, I should go first.
Me. Well, because people are waiting to hear from you, really.
Okay.
So I'm Brenda Draney. I am an artist. I am also living and working in Edmonton. And I have a good and dear friend, and his name is Walter.
Thank you, Brenda. Yes, my name is Walter Scott, and I am an artist living in Toronto, Ontario. And yeah, that's who I am. Oh, yeah, and I have a show at Latitude 53, and we're here to talk about that. Maybe I can also say that Brenda and I met in 2010 at the Banff Centre, the place where like many people meet for the first time.
Mm-hmm. A kind of rite of passage is how Wendy Takara described it.
Yeah, I didn't think when I went to the Banff Centre in 2010 that these people would keep reappearing in my life, but the Canadian art world is so small.
Yeah, Banff was really formative for me.
Yeah.
Was it that way for you?
Yes. Each time that I've gone, some weird breakthrough / meltdown has happened.
And also, like, for me, I was like, it's going to sound very dumb. I'm going to say it anyway. I felt really dumb, but when I went to Banff for the first time, it was for an Indigenous artist residency. And I had such a limited experience of what Indigenous art was or what Indigenous artists were doing and practicing. And so in my mind, it was like Norval Morrisseau, and that was full stop. Like art had stopped happening after him or something. Mm-hmm. And then when I get to Banff and I meet, there was you, Dana Danger, Amy Malbuff, Jordan Bennett, Marianne Barkhouse, and there were all these artists working and living and in different kinds of ways of being and making. Mm-hmm. That was a revelation a bit for me.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we met. And I similarly, I had a really weird understanding of what Indigenous art was, what Indigenous artists do, and what qualifies as it. I was 24 years old when I went to the Banff Centre.
Just a baby.
And I found myself sort of just mimicking what I thought like was the appropriate thing for Indigenous artists to do at that time. Or like I was trying to frame my work within that in a way where I felt like I was trying to inject some of that subject matter into what I was already doing. Like, because I was already like making zines and comics and basically whatever I wanted, right? And then suddenly I entered the Canadian art world with the identity of like I'm an Indigenous person, and so I think it like created a little bit of pressure to frame myself in that way. But then like at the same time, like I met you, and you're an Indigenous artist, and you were making work about memory and about like the loss of memory, like all of these things that weren't explicitly like having to do with Indigenous subject matter. They maybe were, but on like a subconscious level. And so meeting you was one of the first times, the beginning of this like expanding idea of like what an Indigenous cosmology can be and how it can be represented in art or not.
Jeez, that's very generous of you.
Do it if you don't want to.
But that's very generous of you to include me among them, because I feel like I was fumbling around and I didn't know. And I felt like
is this where you get choked up?
No, this is Barbara Walters. I felt like it was I had wished that working in a kind of obvious Indigenous way, and when I say that, I think that's a complicated way to phrase it, but you know what I'm saying. And I feel like working with identity politics or something like that. And I didn't have an honest way that I could approach it. Do you know what I mean? Like if I went into that way, I'd be performing something like that.
You felt like you had an imposter syndrome of some kind.
Yeah, and I've always felt that. Even today, I still feel like you have to get as close to honest. And so I feel like that was very generous of you to say. But I remember also during that time, was it that residency or the next one when Winona was created?
So 2010, we met at the Banff Centre, and then I love that this like introduction of our friendship is the beginning of this talk, and it's like kind of like a bit longer than I thought. But okay, so then 2013, I went back to the Banff Centre, and you went back to the Banff Centre, and we were both back at the Banff Centre doing the same. Were we doing the same residency?
Was that the Candace Hopkins?
No. Sorry, this is probably really boring for people who are listening. But anyway, like.
No, but I'm talking about the origin of Mandy, because I'm trying to get there, because I read an interview that you gave where you were sort of talking about this Winona character and its complexities for you. And I didn't know that you were having those kinds of questions and that kind of thinking around this character that you had created for your Wendy comics. I didn't know that you had been having those kinds of questions when you were introducing her. She was a new kind of development.
Yeah, so what happened, for a bit of context, is Winona is the Indigenous character in the Wendy series. And I invented her in 2012 when I released the second Wendy zine. And then I went to the Banff Centre in 2013, and she was already a character in the series. So at the Banff Centre, what I did is I had a Wendy book club event where I just sent an email out, I put some posters up around the Banff Centre, and had people come, like, read the book. Like, everyone who was interested, I'd give them a copy, like put them in their mailboxes or whatever, and then you can come and like talk about the book, because the book is about the art world. It's about like ostensibly, because Wendy's in it, it's Winona's in it, it's like about Indigenous people in the art world. Like, it's about the Canadian art world. I mean, the book, the zine Trendy Wendy, was like about the Banff Centre, basically. Like, the whole the whole like story is about Wendy at the Flojo Island art residency. And so it just made sense that now that I've returned to this place that the book was inspired by, the zine was inspired by, we might as well all sit around and look at what I've done and talk about
it out.
Yeah. And
I remember because I got drunk one night and I was dancing, and Brian called me Brendy on a bendy.
Yes.
And then you were like, "No, it's Wendy on a bendy. I already wrote that."
How delightfully pedantic of me.
No, it was funny.
Yeah.
But I was reading that in that same interview. Where was that interview where you talked about the struggle with Winona?
Canadian art online.
Maybe it was Canadian art, but at any rate, you also spoke about a 1-to-1 ratio. So when we read the zine, when we read the book, it's not been enlarged or shrunken. So it's like drawing, like empathy with the artist's hand. We can see there's a kind of intimacy that happens because it's like we're looking at your diary, is how you maybe put it.
Yeah, yeah. And I've like taken that little nugget out here or there for like press since that, like, I like that, like it's reproduced at the exact same size that I drew it, because
it's like that generosity, which is interesting to me because I have to say when I read, you know, I love these books. I love the people have said they love the character Wendy, and I love the character Wendy, but my investment is more in the whole world of it. You've created a parallel universe, and but in doing so, it's so close to the real, and then it's not. And there's she's so close to this insider circle, but she's not. And we as a viewer get to be so close to that circle, but we're not. And it leaves me with this FOMO, like I can't get there. And then so it's almost like another sort of delightful desire thing that happens when it's the 1-to-1 ratio, I think.
Yeah, the proximity. There's like a proximity where you feel both close and far at the same time, like you're looking through a window, maybe.
And that seems to be, it's like meta because that operates on so many levels. It's kind of what the books talk about, is who has proximity.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. It makes the book sound way more interesting. And I think that I like to make comics. I like to make sculpture. I like to make drawing. Like, I consider myself multidisciplinary artist. And so I do try to think about the medium in like a broader sense, because as much as people might not believe this, like I have difficulty with graphic novels. I have difficulty reading them, engaging with them. Like having a sustained engagement in graphic novels is difficult for me, partially because they're also vastly different, but also because like it's a very complex medium, which people might not think, because there's this continuing thing of like graphic novels are not real literature and they're for children and they're just adapted for adults, but they're originally for children. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that like they don't always work for me, and like I don't think that they always work, period. Like sometimes I see the artwork and I see the text and it's not working together, and then there's like 300 pages of it. So I think people are surprised to hear that like I'm not really like thinking about Wendy and in and around the vernacular of graphic novels, because it's kind of hard to do that because the vernacular is so vast, and I don't steep myself in, like I try to not really steep myself in the language of graphic novels. I think I've made a comic, but I've used these shorthands from like what I feel is some larger pool of influence. And in a certain way, it like includes ideas of spatiality that I might get or I might engage with when I'm making sculpture. And it also engages with things that I might think about that I get from film or television. And that like the confluence of influences are beyond just it in relation to all these other tropes of the graphic novels.
Yeah, I almost get the feeling when I'm reading them, and when I saw the pathos of Mandy, like their vehicle, they're almost, because they're, I don't want to say they're a vehicle because it's reductive of the work that you do, because I think the work operates so beautifully on so many levels, but I think that it in addition to, maybe it operates as a kind of vehicle for criticism, for art criticism, for like an essay, like a dissertation or something.
It's a meme.
What?
A meme.
Well, now you reduced it.
Well, like a package of information.
How do you see it? Like, what do you mean a meme?
Well, memes like on the internet are these like like the definition of a meme is like a like satchel, a packet of information that's disseminated. And like I think we consciously or subconsciously view a lot of the information that we receive through that framework is that everything is kind of a meme or memified or something.
Yeah.
And I don't.
But yours is more complex, right? Like yours is
also like
complex. Like
I'm not discrediting the ability for complexity in that. In fact, I think that like it does sort of like make complex ideas really easy to be disseminated.
Yeah, because you, but I feel like, I mean, you're asking questions more. You're not trying to like say this thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, there are. I don't really feel like talking about memes that much, but they do sort of like create these proposals for thinking about something, create paradoxes or rhetorical questions, and I feel like Wendy does the same. But of course, Wendy's not a meme. But in the same way that it's not a hyper complex graphic novel, like formally, its simplicity, I think, is what gives it its ability to sort of ooze around. Like, okay, here's an example that might point, like a physical example that might point to something that I think is interesting, is that I did an interview with Tavi Gevinson, and she said, I'm glad to be interviewing you. Like, before this, like years ago when I found Wendy, I like took all of these pictures of the inside of the book and I used them to like illustrate my emotions to people when I was texting them.
Yeah.
So, like the fact that Wendy could like be reduced and disseminated in that way, but still maintain its legibility, I think speaks to an interest of mine in terms of like how information gets spread and how messages can be disseminated, what mediums can do, and like creating a project that's like medium flexible. Because Wendy is like a graphic novel, but also like I've extended it into like this animated film that I'm showing,
which loses the 1-to-1 ratio, and then loses that intimacy if it's in a gallery. Would you say, or no? Did I come?
I think that if we're talking about the 1-to-1 ratio,
Is that even important? Am I making more of it?
Well, no, I think if we're talking about intimacy, in the books, the one-to-one ratio makes that happen. But
And the intimacy of a book, just the way it functions.
But like, I think that in the film, the intimacy is more to do with, say, how I draw a character and I have the characters interacting in their drawings, but the backgrounds are photographs of places that I've been. So there, the intimacy is the proximity between the real and the imagined. And
how close you get. We're almost, it's
close yet far. Like you could see the dimension right here.
Yeah. Like that, why I think one of the most beautiful scenes is Mandy and her partner on the bed with
Mandy's
vodka.
Mandy is a boy.
With their partner, right?
Yeah.
On the bed. Did I say she?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize.
It's fine. Gender is a drag.
That's true.
Yeah.
And then also there was that really beautiful where Mandy's on the train lying down and I can see you.
Yeah, that's a nod to photography, of which I know nothing about. But this idea of filming this empty space that I put a version of myself in, but the act of filming it is like witnessed in the reflection. I mean, it's like, you know, this like diffracted self-portrait with all of these layers.
Because that's the thing. It's I guess that's the thing. It's like I was wondering when I was talking to you if there's like a micro and macro. We can go into the Wendyverse and take apart, like, how's Wendy function? How does Mandy function? How does Screamo or Winona? And we can go there, but then we can pull back and just sort of talk about how the whole thing functions. And then even further, we can talk about how your practice functions.
Yeah.
In the same way, you can look at the comic, or you can look at that individual. I think I'm coming to where we're going. The same way when we look at a single panel, sometimes they're so fucking beautiful. Like the panel that says, "Would you like coffee?" and her whole face is yes.
Yes, that went viral on Tumblr like 5 years ago.
That was my heart. Like, yeah. Do you want to know a secret? This is a non sequitur. Do you want to know a secret?
Yeah.
I have two glasses here. One has water and one has White Claw.
I'm not surprised in the very least, but thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Yeah, so because I was wondering if you had a preference for, do you like to talk about, is it exhausting or something to talk about the nuances inside the Wendyverse, and you would rather sort of talk about the whole thing from afar? About it, I guess.
Well, the joy of being a secret nerd is that, like, I have a system for everything, and everything sort of fits into this like system. And there's like these rhythms that happen on a macro scale and a micro scale simultaneously, and they feed sort of off of each other. And I think that's just like the nature of, like, for instance, writing a graphic novel, because like you have like the larger story beats, and then you have the rhythm of the smaller stories, and all of it is a system that has to work together. There needs to be a like beginning, middle, end with a crescendo, and everything leading up to it has to be these swirling, whirling sort of happenings that reference back to each other and come back. And like somebody in one of these like Zoom things like wrote a comment like, "You used to be a drummer, and how does being a drummer or music affect?"
I was thinking about that. Thompson Highway, wasn't he a musician?
I don't know.
Thompson Highway is a writer. He wrote a play called Dry Lips Ought to Move to Capus Casing. You probably know that. I'm saying it for the people.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it is similar to music. And then you were saying that, like, you know, is there some macro micro way to look at my whole art practice as being this like system and then systems within systems and whatever. And I think so. Like there's some sort of holistic sort of cosmology happening. And there's ways that sculpture can illustrate and add to the ideas I might have brewing in graphic novels. Like I'm hoping that like simultaneously one aspect of my art practice can illuminate the other, but at the same time I don't want to explain everything with something else, like it's some panic room that like we're all trying to even though that's sometimes how it feels. I'm trying to get myself out of a panic room. But
what do you explain that?
Well, it's like follow this clue, and then you'll get this clue, and then you'll get to this. Next thing you know, you're trying to like, preclude and like have everything explain everything else, which I think is like
an instinct. Solved.
Well, yeah, and I think that's an instinct that like artists have that like it betrays like a deep insecurity that like things aren't good enough unless you have this other thing to explain it, right? So I'm just saying I have this instinct, and I think that conversely, and the other side of it is I also try to just throw shit in there that fucks it up and makes things a little bit.
I think even if you didn't, your work is too complex. Like the kinds of ideas that you grapple with within the work is fucking. It's. I mean, I got to stop swearing. It's really heavy. It's really complicated, and it. That's why it stays with you. That's part of the real success for me is that you come away struggling with the ideas that have been presented. So I don't find it to be, and that's an escape room. A panic room is like Jodie Foster.
I meant escape room.
Yeah.
Art practice to be this like series of clues in an escape room, and then you figure it out, and then
it's solved. And like that's what I mean. Like then it's solved, and I don't have to think about this anymore. I can move on. But that's not your work. I really swear. It's like your work is leaving too many questions and dealing with. You know what it is? I think if there is that kind of escape room thing, then I wonder about the earnestness or sincerity of the work. And I believe in the sincerity of your work. I believe in the sincerity of the anxieties that are depicted, the questions, the kinds of how we question who our own authorship and our own identity. I think that those are very earnest struggles that you present.
And I think like this struggle with earnestness is like encapsulated in my sculptural anxiety around what's the word? Figuration. Like I feel like I struggle with the sincerity of figuration because sometimes I feel like it's really easy. I feel like it's really easy to lean into figuration to overprescribe ideas around like presence. And then I'm like, sometimes feel this internal pressure to pull away from figuration because for me, I often equate that with something that seems more like a complexity, like a deconstruction, a depersonalization. So the perpetual like struggle between leaning in and out of figuration, I feel is a bit, I think it's represented in the show actually in Edmonton because you have half the body. And I feel like there's like a struggle for me, like both conceptually and sort of formally to decide whether I want to personify. Do I want to be a body or do I not want to be a body? Like when does artwork just become like a puppet that you nail to the wall? And when can it like lean out of that and become a little more diffuse?
I like these images that they're showing.
And I think that like the works are like this uneasy, they're in between this uneasy place, and it's a way to sort of answer that question somehow. like I mean, like many artists, like I can frame these in terms of like trauma or disembodiment or whatever, right? I think that these are things that I've been thinking about. Like I have been thinking about depersonalization a lot. Like the very act of creating Wendy as an avatar, like that is outside of me, that represents a version of me. To think about that formally in a sculptural sense, I start thinking about like pants without a body, or feet that are hollow but are made out of the thing that you write your fiction on, that are like the jacket sitting on a chair with some beadwork on the back. Like the whole thing sort of hints at a body, where a body should be, but it has this like projection quality, so it's like projecting itself. There's like so much going on, and I could feel myself like becoming starting to sort of over prescribe and describe what each element is,
like within the work itself.
Yeah. But anyway, I guess my main point is that my graphic novels are this act of depersonalization in a weird way. And then like I find myself replicating and trying to extrapolate what that anxiety is in a sculptural sense too. Like what does this depersonalization mean, this narrativization mean of like a somatic lived experience, a body, an identity. One thing that might help to think through that is the fact that like there's a jacket over here and like a pants over here on the wall, and if you put them together, that kind of makes a person. And then there's in the other room there's shoes. So really, like if you put the whole exhibition, squeeze it into a little ball, you have like an entire individual. But right now across the space, it's been diffused into all of these artworks, like a person has been scattered. I went off into that tangent there. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it's interesting too, because the pants on the wall particularly tell me about or describe a kind of, like I was saying to Adam when we were doing our technological test for this, I still find this weird, like a dissonance I experience in seeing my face. And I often have to cover my face because I'll look at myself and for too long it's hypnotic.
Yeah.
Because of my beauty. It's just no, it's just a left and right thing and seeing yourself in a camera, but there's a delay. And we're all experiencing this right now.
Yeah.
And we're all talking heads. So, and I remember when we were in Banff together, and I would hang out in your studio, and you said to me, you know, people, we need to be engaged in some kind of physical activity or some kind of something like that, because it's easy for us to ignore that our bodies and our physical activity needs to be part of a healthy practice.
Yeah, I'm sure I said that. I don't doubt I said that because I was having a physical meltdown.
Aww.
At the time.
Really?
You don't remember.
Your humor, and you have a way of being able to describe the meltdown so it feels like you're together and I'm relating to it, so it doesn't seem abnormal. I'm like, yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess like
maybe I was having a meltdown at the time.
Well, that's what the Banff Centre is for. You go there, you have a meltdown, you destroy whatever relationship you had in the other city.
Absolutely.
You come from, and then you like become, I don't know, you get into astrology. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the only way forward.
So yeah, I guess generally like
But we all have to do a series. Do you think that we have to do a sort of series of coming undone and putting ourselves together again?
I think that I'm going to do that. I'm not going to say that I have to, but I feel like I don't have a choice but to do that, because I feel like it's becoming clear to me that that's kind of the core of my practice, is thinking about like the narrativization of an individual, like the fiction and the reality of a person. The stories that we tell about ourselves versus the stories that we've been told about who we are they become intertwined inside of us, and it's like the act of like trying to separate that.
And it's more heady for ones who live in small communities, grew up in a small community. I think that we have an idea, we get told who we are more quickly.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like half of who I am is what other people think. And like, that's really disorienting, but something to think about.
Yeah.
You're never ever necessarily the person who you think you are. I mean, of course, like in this like larger way, self-determination, blah, 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 self-identify. But in an objective sense, I don't know if that's true. Because even like Tabby Gevinson was like, I love this book, and I can't believe that a man was able to write so succinctly about a woman. And I kind of felt like this millennial meme where I was like, did you just assume my gender?
Yeah, how about that?
How about that?
But I mean, male authors have been writing women forever. And I feel I'm not bothered by this. This just seems like I don't know why, but whenever I've read Wendy, I was really okay with it. It never, and then I remember the conversation coming up, you as a man writing about a woman, nah, 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 nah. And I was just sort of like neither here nor there about that conversation. It came out of you, but it was original and interesting and relatable. And one of the things one of the ways in which your work operates for me is that you take this like, is Wendy you, are you Wendy, blame it, and then that whole creation of this universe. And those questions of authorship and those questions about who you are, then we inherit them and we become complicit, and I start to question, start to invite those questions about my own self. That's the power of your work, right? Like it brings them to the table for us in a way that we don't mind inviting in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's like this alchemy of like general and specific. Because people say like the more specific a story is, the more potential there is for you to inject yourself into it.
I've always said that like there's a need for a certain amount of specificity. It's like a kitchen table, and it's something we can set things on, something we can all practice empathy with.
Yeah.
So you bring that specificity, but
the food you put on it can be different.
Yeah, you brought it so close, and then you don't let us have it because it's not our universe. It's Wendy and Screamo and Winona and Mandy and all of them.
Yeah, and maybe another facet of the removal / closeness / far awayness, other dimensionness, like this like relationship to intimacy and proximity, is that when I made a Japanese version of Wendy like years ago now, there was one story that I purposely just had in all of these different languages. Actually, no, let me back up, because that's a more specific example. But the book in general was in Japanese. It was translated into Japanese, and I didn't release it in English. And there were like a lot of people being like, when will I get the English version? When can we see the English version? And like Wendy was like traditionally like a North American audience. And I think that like people had this assumption that Wendy was for them, And so this version of Wendy that was like legible to them was coming soon or should. And I didn't translate it. Well, I mean, I did eventually, but like I didn't have an intention to ever translate it into English.
I remember you telling me that.
And I think that if we're going to speak to something that I think you and I relate to personally is I grew up in Kahnawake, which is a Mohawk community, and I was I took Mohawk immersion until 4th grade. So science, math, gym, whatever, Mohawk. It was all in Mohawk, or Ganyegeha, as we say. And then I went off into the world and I lost my ability, my engagement to that language. And there's a lot of people in my community who like, who don't speak Ganyegeha. And it creates this dynamic where it's like, here is, you have ownership over this thing that you don't have. It's really like a bizarre cognitive dissonance to feel like something is yours, but you also don't have it at the same time. Like Mohawk is like you're trying to look through a foggy window at something. You can only really barely sort of legibly make it out. And so I guess in this trollish kind of way, I was like, if I make this like Wendy and people feel like they have ownership and identify with this character, but they also at the same time are encountering an illegibility at the same time as like witnessing something that feels very relatable, I feel like that's the same sort of affect it feels to feel like you have ownership or have like a language, but it's inaccessible.
So you're not fluent.
No.
But you can understand and can speak, or?
Well, I guess maybe, yeah, more specifically, I like have these like broad strokes of understanding when I encounter Ganyegeha. Like a lot, like, well, actually, no, it's mostly vague with very small moments of, I know what that means. I know what that is. I get the general gist of what's going on. But for me to like consciously understand all of it and recite it back, it's not in my conscious. It's somewhere in my subconscious somewhere. And what's weird about memory is that I have dreams where Mohawk words come to me in my dreams. And then in the morning, I'm like, I think that was a word and I think I know what it means. And it's weird to imagine that that information is somewhere inside of me.
That's beautiful.
And so I guess it feels bizarre it seems like you're existing in two spaces at the same time. So so basically making Wendy in Japanese for an audience that's used to feeling like they claim ownership over something, I wanted to show that like just because you feel like something's yours doesn't mean that like you have access to it. So I guess it was kind of a hostile thing to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was, I wouldn't say hostile, but it was about access and not who has access to this. It's again, like that's what I was saying about this proximity and access, and you make us rethink our own privilege and our own what's my backyard and what is my territory. You make us, well, hold on, you should ask a few questions about that first, because there's a complexity here that you may not have thought of, you may not have seen. I mean, for me, I never grew up speaking Cree. My mom was in residential school, so she doesn't, and she can understand and she can speak very little, but so I took a bunch of Cree courses and I can do like a preliminary, but I can't really speak Cree at all. And I have that same feeling, because of course people always say, and it is true, that the language of your culture is so important to learn because there's a worldview embedded,
Yeah, it makes me think of cosmology in general. And in that sense, that influences the way I think of the cosmology of Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think about like dissemination of information and legibility and access in ways that like I feel are, I wouldn't say general, but more expansive than what people might assume Indigenous people who make work about language would do. And I think people have an idea of what that is, which is like, here is a piece about how I don't speak my language specifically. And I think that for me, my journey as an artist is thinking more about that like experience and expanding it into these artworks that like tackle that, but in a myriad of different ways beyond like the specificities of like my subjectivity, my language, my identity. Maybe, you know, maybe I will write a whole graphic novel about it at one point, but like I don't. It's not the best use of that experience for me right now.
And it's like while the whole point of a specificity in the work for me is that if it's something like a kitchen table, or if it's something like a mug with an insult on it, then 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 it's something, there's a democracy there. Most people know, most people have. And then I know that mug. Oh, I know that table. So this is a world I can access on some level. But you want to sort of pull away to create a more complicated, to make us think in a more complex way. So that not everything is, because you don't, how can I say this? Like if I were to do something with the specificity of the Cree language or whatever, there's so much damn luggage around me being an Indigenous woman, blah, blah. And then I'm doing work about the Cree language and the fact that I don't have it. It's so specific that I would fear one might say, okay, well, you're talking about your experience and it's not mine. So I can disengage.
Yeah, people really lose interest when a brown person talks about their subjectivity, for sure.
So if we make it about something like putting it in Japanese or something like that, well, then it's more curious, and we can approach it with curiosity.
You know, if I'm going to be totally honest about Wendy, like a lot of people paid attention to Wendy because there wasn't any like subjective, like there wasn't any markings that it was ethnic, like weirdly ethnic in any way. Like it wasn't like uncomfortably ethnic or anything. Like if I made Winona, it would have a niche audience because people are, you know, they're precluded. They kind of like are they're signaled what to expect. And if they're not interested, they're not going to uptake it. But Wendy is like a white girl. Everyone loves the pratfalls of like a white girl. We're just so used to that.
And the beautiful neutrality of white people, like they're a given.
But so was I, because I subconsciously took up the zeitgeist of the moment, which was like Frances Ha and girls, and like replicated that. It was only after the first zine came out, I said, well, this is a really good Trojan horse opportunity to inject a character that is more directly related to my experience as an Indigenous person. And now that it's all in you guys' face and you're like taking up this medicine, I'm going to like drop a little bit of Winona in there and you're going to have to reckon with that.
Yeah.
As part of this cosmology that you identify with.
Bringing them slowly to a discomfort.
Yeah.
Are you sure? You look like you might not agree with that discomfort.
No, I do. I mean, I think that like in the Japanese Wendy, some of it is in Mohawk and it's untranslated. And I was like listening to a podcast that I found where they talk about my book, and like the white people were like, Well, you know, I guess that section, it just wasn't for us. It's just not for me. If I don't understand it, it's just not for me, which I find like completely shitheaded and a really large part of why people are really pissed off right now, because it's not that it's not for you, it's yours to misunderstand.
Yes.
Or
yours to sit in there and see
to
this.
not understand. It's yours to have no translation for. And then you maybe think about what that means.
Yeah, like say that again.
I had too much coffee.
No. It's like no, but I was just thinking like I've been reading a bit about white fragility, and I've been thinking about it and how it is difficult to walk, like if everything was made for you and everything was always made for you in your world, it must be difficult to walk into a room and behold artwork that, like, by all intents and purposes, this should be for me. Yet I see that it isn't. I'm not the intended audience. And so how do I grapple with this?
I think there's something about my use of beadwork in this show that I was thinking through in those terms. In terms of like what beadwork in an exhibition is meant to signify. Because for me, if I take a step back, beads are just a really simple way to applique a message onto something. And the cultural implications are there, maybe, but also maybe not. That like just the ability, like the problem-solving desire to create an image can be solved using culturally specific mediums, you know, without having that be the reference that is like should be at the forefront. Like, you know, if we took everyone out of the world except Indigenous people doing beadwork, there wouldn't be this exchange of like what it means about our identity. It would be like, my nephew wants Pikachu and his regalia, and this is what I'm gonna draw it with beads.
Yeah.
Like there is sort of a culture of that already, like Baby Yoda beads or whatever. Like the like
that Baby Yoda blew up. That was beaded Baby Yoda.
Yes, pink ears like the sunset. So anyway, but then, you know, putting it in an art gallery and not having that cultural thing be specific, like if you're looking for it, and here's what I'll kind of explain what I was thinking is the beads, like the act of writing, suddenly like it drips down and the beads are sort of behaving like this line, like a line drawing, and then it's like put onto a projector, and like the line that you use for writing is put up in this weird sort of like, what's it called, Rorschach test, like the thing where you can like you like look at something and humans immediately try to find an image in it, and like
it tells you about who you are.
Yeah, like trying to find the image in the act of writing and having possibly the like the beginning of like your personhood. In this case, the beads might reference like the beginning of my personhood as an Indigenous background, and having that sort of be put up, and projected. Those are the kind of associations I was going for.
I remember in one of your first art, does it bother you that I'm bringing up all this? I have this weird memory for things, so I can bring up like something you said in like the 90s or something.
Fantastic.
What?
Go ahead.
But one thing you said in an artist talk years ago is you were bringing up on in your community, people were co-opting logos and like McDonald's or something, but they were sort of messing with them to make them their own. And then I see the way your sculpture, like even in the Pathos of Mandy, where the counterfeit Mandy or the second character had like a zipper mouth, and like it was a cardboard box, and you in your sculptural practice you'll often use these sort of unprestigious items, these everyday items that.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I can elaborate a bit on that.
Mm-hmm.
So back home, most of the businesses are mom and pop. Like in capitalism has like been kept. There's a Tim Hortons at the end of town.
They keep it there.
Signage is left up to the townsfolk. So, and I'm sure this isn't the only reservation that's like this, but like appropriating popular cartoons and logos and changing them a little as like a joke, you know, like McSmokes is the cigarette shack with the McDonald's logo, McSmokes, and then Wild Bill's for some reason has Yosemite Sam. It's, you know, it's just, and also Dairy King. It's not Dairy Queen, it's Dairy King. It's different, but it's a way to identify that it's ice cream because people know what Dairy Queen is, but it's Dairy King, right? So these kinds of like sly sort of like takes on like larger brands. Another thing is like Cadbury's, not Cadbury's, what's it called? Someone's chip stand has like Elsa from Frozen on it. Like just put, there's like a play on words often. It's just like
Elsa's old.
It's like a fuck you to language, but it's like a playful sort of like relationship to language. There's like a slippage of language. Like I can feel there is a slippage of language. Our relationship to language in my community is already so fraught that I feel like maybe there's some sort of instinctual understanding of that. So anyway, I was talking to a curator. I was in Athens actually, and hanging out with all the Canadians, which is what happens when you go anywhere. And he was like, you know, the way that you make signs in Wendy, they're like parodies of like shops that exist, like, and I feel like you do that really well. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then it's like I felt like I was like seen by this person with their two eyes, because they were like, because I know where you're from, and you posted images of back home, and it's the same instinct, the same sense of humor, it's the same sort of thing. Like your people do that already. And so that for me was like somebody pointing out to me that like my specific Indigenous subjective background helped me to create these satirical images in Wendy that aren't, you know, obviously from a background like that. They just like helped me with my comedy in a larger sense.
Yeah. Do we want to open it up for questions soon?
I'd be glad to.
Does anyone have a question? How will we know, Adam?
Let me jump in here and just say, if folks who are watching do want to leave a question in the comments, I would be happy to pass it along to Walter or Brenda or both. I kind of have a question building on what the two of you have just been talking about I guess access or ownership of, you know, that feeling of whether or not something is for you or not. I wonder, Walter, if you want to talk a little bit about how that maybe overlaps with putting up a show that so far no one has been able to see in person, except for, you know, a very, very small number of people. I know that it's something that we talked about a lot leading up to it, but yeah, maybe you want to open that up a little bit.
Yeah, because the exhibition did change, didn't it? Because, largely for practical reasons that bizarrely ended up sort of underlining a lot of the conceptual ideas that were already in the exhibition. Mm-hmm. Because the Pathos of Mandy as a video has all of these layers of reality already. You know, it's a drawing. It's drawings of people on top of like pictures of real places. So there already is these layers, right? This mise en abîme of like it like sort of reflecting itself forever. And then, you know, like in the before times, you would enter a gallery and encounter that, but now you can't. So we devised the webcam as a solution for that. And it kind of just opened up the whole show in this bizarre way, because the Pathos of Mandy is already about the slippage between the fiction and the reality of being an artist, the slippage between like a personal and a private identity, the fiction and reality of like being an artist, and then the fiction you have about being an artist, being a person, and the fiction you make around yourself about being an artist. It became expanded formally and spatially, because now we're witnessing a live stream of a space that people would usually sit in, and like the fiction and reality are like the relationship that we have, this narrative that we have inherited around like the where viewers are and like who we are as viewers and what viewers are meant to do has changed. And also it just adds to the like alienation of the whole show, because the show is about personal alienation. So having to watch a video of a room with a video playing inside of it, it says nothing but alienation to me. So that's one example of how the show has kind of benefited.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I could take that back. For any of this.
It's complicated. I don't know. We've been in our internal conversations with the gallery. We're looking at whether we can be open for people to make appointments to come visit, rather than being, you know, open in general sense, because, well, right, just people's expectations is changing. But it's so funny. I don't know. I do have a comment from Facebook here as well. Justin writes, hi, Walter and Brenda. Walter, you had a reading of Wendy in the art school in Calgary as part of the literary festival, and you spoke in Kanyakaha. Afterwards, I had mentioned the reading and how you spoke your traditional language to a mutual acquaintance, and they remarked that the experience for you might have been more difficult than the audience knew. I always wondered about that, especially considering, as you mentioned, that the Wendy books are somewhat an act of depersonalization. This seems like this view of this comment is cutting out for me. I don't know what to do. Let me see if I can. No. I'll have to load up Facebook here. Hang on a second. I didn't realize it was cut off. Justin, you got to make paragraph breaks for us. Sorry?
I'm asking Walter if he remembers this event.
Like, sort of. I don't remember speaking at Kanyakaha, but I think that was WordFest. WordFest was my first literary festival where I was like hanging out in like a hotel room with like a children's book author, and like it was so genre-ish in this way that it was completely new to me.
All right, I've got the rest of the comment here.
Yeah, okay.
I always wondered about that, especially considering, as you mentioned, that the Wendy books are somewhat an act of depersonalization. What is different when the somatic, the body, is activated in those spaces? Are you willing to talk a bit about taking those physical risks? Like, why put yourself out there when you could so easily stay within a space of the depersonalized, so common in the art world?
I guess because it's just part of my art practice, I guess, is like vulnerability and then not, and like the negotiation between the two. I like was out once when I lived in Vancouver. I was hanging out with Jeffrey Farmer, and I guess I was like blah 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 blah, and he was like, "You have 3 different voices, and you seem to go between the 3 as a way to navigate disruption." And I was like, "Oh, so you don't think I'm a fake ass? That's nice." And I think that like injecting me speaking Ganyegeha into the way that I am in the world is just another facet of that, like how to like exist in all of these different ways at the same time. And it's hard to know what is a performance and what isn't at a certain point, because I'm sure that even Indigenous people who are speaking their language at art events, like they do understand the artifice of it as well. Like there's an honesty and like a sense that you're giving a part of yourself, but like it is within this context where you understand like the performativity of it as well, and other people expect you to understand the performativity so that they can situate themselves as a viewer. And so I don't know if anything is ever fully vulnerable and honest or not, that like it's just a negotiation that we all decide what are the parameters of this exchange. And Brenda, like, you know, you and I are both like light-skinned Native people. As far as anyone knows, we're just a couple of Karens at the restaurant, like
exactly
just wanting a fucking discount because this tablecloth is dirty.
It's disgusting.
You know, nobody would like to admit that, but it does affect the way people identify with us or don't identify things with us.
Yeah. Like I mean, most obviously, I have a privilege that my sister doesn't have, that my mom doesn't have.
And that all comes into like, you know, a performance or a not performance, or a disability or a not disability. And I think it's a whole other can of worms and a whole other hour-long discussion, but I think it's something that I like to think about in relation to things.
Mm-hmm.
So Tiffany Collins is asking about the difference between the Banff Centre and Fogo Island as a residency. For example, you mentioned having a crisis. Is there a method of procedures for every residency, or are they each unique?
A method of procedures for people having a crisis?
For every residency, maybe the residential crisis, the residency crisis.
Is there like a right way to have a crisis depending on what residency you're doing?
Well, do you have a procedure, a method of procedure?
Well, this is what I did in Fogo Island. I didn't talk to anybody because there was no one to talk to. And I made popcorn on the stove that I burned. And then I had to open all the doors and the windows. And then the wind blew through my whole salt box house. And so that's one procedure that you could try.
We had such different experiences. Like, I am in love with Fogo Island. I will go back as soon as they allow me to. I love it so much.
I would go back, but you need a car, and I don't have a car. And
I don't drive, right?
I was the only artist there for a whole month, and so it was like kind of lonely.
I don't drive, so they had this young lady, Dihua, and she was working for the architect there. And so they gave her a car, and she drove me to and from the studio. And Dee and I, we fell in love with each other. We love each other. And so we would go from my studio, we would pick up some food, we'd go to my little salt box house, and she would show me how to cook, and she would cook food. And then we would sit in front of the wood stove and talk about art and architecture and stuff. It was like really dreamy.
It sounds fantastic. I burnt some popcorn. I ruined a pan, and took a lot of
bananas flambe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And well, one thing I would say, this isn't always possible for everybody, but if I'm going to go to another residency, I need to make sure that I'm not going there with any expectations to make anything. Sure, I'll work on deadlines or whatever, but I don't know if I can go there at this point and try to come up with a project and try to have something finished by the time I leave. Like that I think is the thing.
I have that anxiety every time I go to a residency.
Yeah, and it's not good for me, and I don't think that's what it should be for me anyway.
No, and then Alexandra McIntosh, she comes in to check up on me. And I found myself being really defensive. And I was like, well, the reason I didn't do this or...
Yeah.
But, you know, another thing I wanted to say really quick was that I think grad school brings up a difficulty for people where they try to make it's like trying to make their art airtight. So you can't ask any questions about it, or because we've made our airtight escape room art that like this means this and this means this and
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen. That similar anxiety happens at the residencies, I think.
Yeah, you want to like tie everything up by the end of it.
Yeah, and instead, like, why can't we just leave these loose ends? Like leave it a little loose.
Well, there's a small C thing that I've heard people say about an MFA, that like it's not like the end of an art practice, it's the beginning of one. You don't go there to finally complete an idea, you go there to like start one. And I think you save yourself way more psychic strain if you just see residencies as that too.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's for me, grad school was, I learned a lot, but you know, I came out of there for a while with this attitude, a shitty attitude, where I was like, my ideas are so important because I thought them, you know, my thoughts are so, and
It came to me.
that could be an art project. That could be an art project. Anything. It was so dumb. I had a lot to learn. So it took me a few years after grad school.
I've had a couple of reviews of the work that I made during and after grad school, and none of them were that good. And I don't really blame people for thinking that.
No,
you don't make your best art in grad school, I don't think.
No, because you're making it for class ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for school. There's this curator who we were talking about how long we had known each other, and it turned out we'd known each other for many, many years. And I had just come out of undergrad when they had first come into my studio and looked at my paintings, but they had forgotten it. And I'm dumb, so I reminded them. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's right. Your paintings were not good. Mm-hmm. Like, they were pretty bad.
When Nicholas Schafthausen invited me to Fogo and then later to Lisbon, he completely forgot that he met me at the Banff Centre in 2010, and we had like he was not interested in what I was doing. And when I went to Fogo, I kind of hid a little bit. Like I was like, I'm just not going to tell him that I'm the same person. Until finally I couldn't take it anymore. And I was like, I'm that artist that you didn't like. And he was like, yes, I know, I could tell when I saw you and saw your work. It came back to me. And I'm like, you made a mistake. But now we're good.
Yeah, I'm sure. Everything's better now. Man, you don't know you're making, like, I didn't know I was making shitty work until afterwards. Like at the time, you know, I was offended. Like, look at my magnificent paintings. Why aren't you in love?
It's not always like that, though. Like sometimes you look back at your work and you're like, oh my God, I was doing this thing. I didn't realize I was doing it, but I totally see what that is now.
I've had that with one or two paintings, but on my practice writ large, nothing until after grad school.
That's fair.
For me, I think that's when I started to, I don't know what, grow up. I doubt it.
Well, we've been talking for over an hour now, so I feel like maybe, unless there's any more questions from the audience, this might be the place to wrap it up. I'll give you a last chance. I know the last time we did one of these, Justin was also writing a really long question and I cut him off. So I'll try to go slow in case anyone else has anything.
Yeah.
But I do want to thank everyone for tuning in. And especially I want to thank Walter and Brenda for sharing all of this, their shared experiences and commentary here. It's been fun. I had a great time. So thank you both.
Thanks a lot.
And we are going to continue to have Walter's work up at Latitude 53 through most of July. So that live stream will still be existing. And it might even be possible for you to come book a visit in the next couple weeks' time. We will have more on that soon. Yeah, thanks again for everyone for tuning in.
Is there anything, Walter, that you think that we could have talked about that we didn't get to?
No, I'm very satisfied with all the different roads we went down.
Oh, do you want to see something that I've had behind me?
Sure.
It's Christian Chapman. Do you remember?
Oh yes, how nice.
Hold on, I'm trying to get it in the middle.
Christian.
I can't do it because I don't understand technology. But you get it.
Well, I hope to see Mick again someday soon.
Yeah, that was a Christian Chapman work that I have behind me. And then I have a Dwayne Linklater. And this is, I think this is Kabluziak.
Wonderful.
Showing off your sweet collection.
Yeah, but Christian Chapman gifted me this print. He gifted one to Walter as well.
Yes, he did.
It was at the residency where we were all attending.
Well, I think I'm going to close us down here. So thanks again, everyone. And we'll see you someday when we're allowed to do that again.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Someday in the New World Order.
Yes.